Many years ago, in basic training at Fort Knox, Kentucky, our unit was doing the land navigation course. The course is designed to make sure soldiers learn how to read a map, and you're tasked to find locations. Once at the location, there's a code you need to write down, thus proving you actually found it and made your way back. There is a day course and a night course, both out in the middle of the woods of Kentucky. We set up at the day course site and completed it without incident. However, our drill sergeants, being masters of efficiency and laziness, decided that instead of moving everyone, including themselves, to the location of the night land nav course, would just make us walk or navigate there on our own. This added about 2 miles in each direction to our course. They did allow us to start our course early, so we could at least get to the starting point before dark. We were paired up in teams of 2, so me and my battle buddy, BB, planned out our route. One location was middle of nowhere in the woods, and the other was a far distance away, but was a longer dirt road. Knowing that if we moved quickly we'd still have sunset light to work with, we went to the middle of nowhere location first, as it was the hardest to find. Whereas the one along a road next to a cemetery, we figured would be easy to locate, even without any light. We found the first location without too much difficulty, but the sun was quickly setting and it was becoming twilight. As we made our way back out to the road to the second location, by the time we made it to the cemetery, it was pitch black out. The sun had already set. We also only had one flashlight because in the infinite wisdom, only a basic training soldier can have. My BB didn't think to bring this flashlight for a night navigation course. We ended up circling around this entire Civil War era cemetery before we finally found the location marker. We wrote down the code we needed and began a very long walk back to the day navigation site. Luckily, it was a straight shot down road, so we didn't need to worry about getting lost or trying to get through thick woods at night. However, only about a mile down the road, I began to get this feeling that something was following us. I looked behind us, but saw nothing. The further we walked, the stronger the feeling got, as if it was slowly getting closer and closer to us. I asked my BB if he felt anything, but he just gave me this confused look, and began to get very annoyed as I'd turn around and point the only flashlight behind us, rather than keeping it ahead of us. The feeling of dread kept getting stronger, and I repeated the Lord's Prayer in my head several times to try and calm myself, or make this thing go away. As the feeling of dread reached a fevered peak, it suddenly dissipated. I didn't feel anything behind us anymore. For a split second, I was so relieved until it dawned on me that the reason I couldn't feel it behind us anymore was because it was walking right alongside us. It dawned on me that neither this is all in my head, or my BB is really not sensitive to the paranormal. As the now 3 of us walked for about another mile till we reached our campsite at the land nav course. Once we reached the camp, the feeling I had went away, and I just relaxed and managed to catch some ZZs, since I never saw anything and it was just a feeling I would have chalked it all up to, being just a paranoid thought in my head. But the very next day, I went to talk to a good friend of mine in our unit about it. Before I could tell him my story though, he began telling me about a series of weird things that started happening in the camp that night. And I'll never forget when he said, "Yeah, it all started to happen just after you got back." One summer weekend, my parents, my god-siblings, 6 months, 3 and 10, and their parents, had decided that they would go to these cabins at one of the national parks in our province. These cabins weren't creepy or anything, they were actually kind of busy. We rented out 2 rooms for our families. At the time, I was about 15 or 16, the oldest kid in the bunch. So naturally, I became the babysitter of the younger ones, including the baby and toddler. This was fine because I was well versed in taking care of kids and I love my god-siblings. The 10-year-old decided to stick around as dad, so I was left with the 6-month-old and toddler, which, for a lot, that's already a horror story in itself. But we're talking about supernatural encounters, real ones that we've experienced. So, with the baby in my arms and the toddler following me, I decided to go to one of our rooms. As soon as I walked in the room, I noticed a painting of a forest, a lake, and a red canoe. Something drew me to this painting, despite how ordinary it seemed. Like something that just blends into the background, adding some colour, but not enough attention. Yet, I couldn't take my eyes off the painting. Under that painting was a single bed. About 3 feet to the right was a queen bed, and in the corner, at an angle, was a dresser with a large vanity mirror. Tired from the long drive, I sat in the middle of the queen bed, with my back to the mirror. My toddler little god-sibling, let's call her Annie, wanted to play. For the purpose of this story, I'll use my real name, because it actually matters this time. So, Annie climbed onto the bed, and started jumping, giggling, and having fun as kids do. But the newborn brother hadn't slept yet, and was looking a bit restless. I checked to make sure his diaper wasn't full. He wasn't hungry. I figured maybe he was just tired. So I told Annie to go over to the other bed if she wanted to keep jumping. At least it was against a wall, and it'd be safer for her to do so. She complied and continued to play on the opposite bed by the painting. This didn't last long, and she moved right back to my bed to continue jumping. Then I noticed the baby was looking around the room, his attention fixated on something. I asked Annie to stop, and she did. She sat in front of me and suddenly she went serious. She told me she was playing with a friend, a little boy. I thought nothing of it. Maybe an imaginary friend. The baby continued to follow something with his eyes, no matter how hard I tried to lull him to sleep. Look behind you. Someone's behind you, Annie said. I felt chills run down my back, my gut wrenched, and something felt wrong. I shook my head and laughed, playing it off. The truth was, I didn't want to look. I was holding a newborn in my arms and I had a toddler. My parents and godparents were busy starting the fire and cooking our food. My only option was to run, if anything. I joked with her, teasing her and telling her that no, someone was behind her. She giggled at me and shook her head and said, "No, he's behind you. My friend is." I still get chills because I know how this unfolds. So bear with me. My fight or flight instincts kicked in. Holding the baby in one arm and Annie's hand with my other, I rushed out of the room and brought them to the fire pit. My dad snapped a few pictures of Annie by the fire and a large black dog. Mind you, Annie hates dogs, but she loved this random, rather large campsite dog. Her parents were shocked to see her petting the dog, following it around, because she'd usually cry and scream at the sight of any dog, even a chihuahua. The night slowly turned in and we retreated back to our rooms. The whole family gathered in the first room I had mentioned, my mum standing at the door, Annie between her parents on the queen bed. She was crying, wailing and panicking. She looked at me and the words that came out of her mouth were, "He's dead. Alex is dead. He's dead. His whole family died." And she pointed at the painting. "There." I looked at her. "My name is also Alex. I'm a girl." I told her, "Annie, no, I'm right here. Mom and Dad are here with me. We're not dead, we're okay." She proceeded to cry, still panicking and shaking her head. She was terrified. She looked at me again and said it wasn't me. It was Alex, the boy she had been playing with. Then she looked at my mom and asked why she brought a white dog with her and what his name was. There was no white dog in the room, but Annie could see it standing next to her. Her fear was enough to make us leave. Not 12 hours at that cabin, and we left. She remembers that day very clearly up to now. She's 11 and still remembers the events of it. She doesn't understand it, but she knows exactly what she saw. I can't tell her the truth because it doesn't feel like the right time, because we looked at the pictures my dad took of Annie by the fire, and there, in the background, is a faint view of a little boy standing with her. We thought it was the smoke from the fire, but with the next pictures, it was clear that it was not smoke. It was a young boy. In other pictures, there's also a floating orb in many of them. Nothing wrong with the camera or lighting. An obvious orb in our pictures, all near Annie. I grew up in a small community in Ohio, where most of the homes were built in the early 1900s, including my family's. My bedroom was also in our finished attic, and from the time I moved into the room to the time I left for college, I couldn't sleep up there by myself in the dark. I always felt an energy that someone was up there with me. I also would get up before everyone to get ready for school in our bathroom, and would be genuinely scared because I'd feel someone watching me from the hall or hear footsteps when everyone was still in bed. I'm 29 now, and while my mum was visiting me a couple years ago, we were talking, and I jokingly said I always felt a weird energy in our house, and felt like I saw figures out of the corner of my eye. She looked at me and said that she has felt the same thing for years, and she started telling me stories about all her experiences she never shared with us growing up, because she didn't want to scare us. One distinct memory is when my dad was gone for business, but she heard footsteps and her bedroom door opened. She thought it was one of us kids and pretended to still be asleep, so we wouldn't wake her up. After the door closed and she didn't hear any commotion, she said she got up to see what we were getting into, only to find all of us asleep still. She also lost one of her diamond earrings in the basement over 10 years ago, and we couldn't find it anywhere. A few months ago, it showed up one morning on the kitchen table, and no one knows how it got there. We'll also hear our front door open. It's a heavy old door with a distinct sound, but we'll go out to find no one is there and the door is locked. TVs used to turn on themselves in the middle of the night. Power would go off and on, though perhaps the electrical stuff could be attributed to it being an old home. Lots of other small things like that. Anyway, this prompted us to look into who has lived in the home, and we're the fourth family. We found an obituary in the local paper from the 1940s about a boy named David who was 19, and it said he passed away from the illnesses in his home at our address, surrounded by family. He was one of 5 or 6 boys of this family who owned the home for quite a few decades. We think he may be a spirit still in the home, but we feel like he looks after us and is not malevolent. A lot of the activity happens or happened when my dad was away, so we think maybe he looks after us. We've owned the home for more than 25 plus years at this point, and don't get too spooked after finding out who we think the spirit is. It started when I was around 7 years old. Honestly, if I'm being realistic, I can't remember when it started, but all I know is that it was around my 7th or 8th birthday. All I can remember about when it started was one night I couldn't sleep, and where my room was, my window faced my street. I live in a roundabout or a court, some may call it. I would usually look out of my window and just look at the surroundings. But out of nowhere, one night I started to see a man standing at the front of my house. If I'm being honest, I was all that scared, but I was curious to see who it was. So me, being the 7 or 8-year-old self, I tried to figure out who it was. So I opened my window and asked who he was. Remember, I wasn't scared and my room was on the 2nd floor. After calling out, I didn't get a response, and I would end up realising that I couldn't even see his face, even though there was a light post right across the street that shines very brightly. After that, I was a bit scared, so I went to sleep. But after that night, I would end up seeing him most nights. I don't know how many times a week I would see him, but if I was being real, probably a good 4 to 5 times a week I would see him. I've always been bad at sleeping, and I would often do little things to keep me occupied or tire me out. So looking out the window would cure that. But this guy standing there, it wasn't helping. The only thing that I could describe about him is his figure. I couldn't see his face, but all I did see was eyes, but eyes that had a red tint to them. He also had a type of hat on him and what seemed like a cane. Basically, think of how Abraham Lincoln dressed. I don't know, that's the only reference I can think of right now. I would end up seeing him for a good 5 years, if I recall, till one night when my parents were arguing in the basement. I looked out my window and he wasn't standing in front of my house at the foot of the edge of my driveway like he always is. But he was at the side window of the front door. For more detail, when you enter my house, you could only go upstairs or downstairs. So when I saw this, I panicked and ran downstairs because I was terrified he was going to enter. I ended up knocking on the door to the basement, but my parents never heard me, and I ended up crying going back to my room to see where the man was. The last time I saw him was when I looked out my window, and he was reaching for my door, and then I think I blacked out. After that night, I didn't see him anymore, and haven't till this day. I can't explain why I saw him, or what it was, but when I told my parents about this a few months ago, they didn't believe me, and told my grandma, and she said it could have been a spirit or some sort of a shadow person looking at me. I was scared to hear this, but it's been on my mind ever since. If you ask me if I believe in the paranormal, I would say no. But I have several experiences I physically cannot explain, and below are some of them. So let's begin. Back when I was 17, I applied for a job in a spanking new cinema that was new to my city. There was a lot of hype about it, as it was a well-known brand, and known for being in the upper leagues of cinemas. I popped along to the interview and to my surprise, got a job as a cinema host. My duties involved serving guests, selling tickets, cleaning screens and toilets, basically a bit of everything. I'm a movie nerd. I couldn't wait to start. The cinema was part of a massive regeneration of the city and was welcomed by the whole country for creating job opportunities. Now, where this new complex and shopping mall was built had a bit of history to it. Way back in the day, this plot of land is where public hangings used to happen for convicted thieves and convicts, some as young as 9 and 10 years old. In fact, it wasn't until the late 90s or early 2000s was the hanging location permanently removed and replaced with some modern metal sculpture. When I say the location was removed, it was a kind of a circular platform that was locally called the bandstand. After the bodies were hanged, according to history, they were then wheeled a short walkaway and dumped. This is what the cinema and shopping complex was built over. Now you know a little about it, let's move on to the happenings within the cinema, because that's what you're here for. In each cinema screen, there was night vision CCTV installed. It was useful for the ushers spotting teens misbehaving mainly. The cleaners used to be the first ones in the building each morning before us cinema staff would come in. One morning, I came in for my shift, and a few of the cleaners were sitting around the confectionery tables, trying to calm one of the female cleaners down. She seemed really upset about something, and I assumed perhaps a death in the family. I didn't want to intrude, so I went to start opening up the popcorn bins, etc. This is when I overheard one of them say to the other something along the lines of, "She isn't lying, she's telling the truth. I've seen it too." This woman was deeply shaken. I mean, she looked like she just saw a ghost, as us humans would put it. Little did I know, she literally did. Long story short, it all came out that this cleaner had witnessed a ghost in the biggest of the 12 screens. She claimed she was cleaning the stairs when she looked up and saw a man sitting in one of the chairs, but she knew he wasn't real. As her story goes, she quickly fed the screen and ran to the other cleaners crying. Don't blame her. Myself and another staff member thought it would be a good idea to rewind the CCD from this screen and see if we could see anything odd. As we did, we watched her clean the steps with a brush and pan, and then you could see her slightly look up into the middle seats, freeze, fixated on something for around 5 seconds, then drop her brush and run out of the screen. What was incredible to see on the CCTV was a sort of mist in the area she was staring at. Me being me, put it down to dust, maybe a glitch in the screen spotlights, but this domestic cleaner was certain there was a man sitting on the screen by himself. The story quickly spread around the cinema, to the point our management pulled us all in and told us we needed to stop talking about it, and that what happened was a trick of the eye. We didn't dare tell our manager we checked the CCTV, as we know it's not to be used for nosiness purposes. Little stories here and there would casually pop up from time to time. The next one was one of the male staff members who worked up in the projection room, came running down into the confectionery area one evening and swore someone pushed deeply into his back when he was setting up a reel. He was badly shaken and quite the macho man who used to laugh at us for getting scared of being on certain screens by ourselves. He was in the projection room by himself, so there was no explanation for what he felt. I recall seeing management bring him into the office, and around 20 minutes later, he left and didn't come back to finish his shift. A few days after that, we were told he wouldn't be working in projection anymore, and instead would become an usher. We were shocked as the pay was a lot less, but that's what he did. Someone asked him what on earth happened, and he point blank refused to talk about it. Rumour has it his back was bruised from the firm push, but I can't confirm nor deny that, as I never saw it. The cinema was so bright and flashy. When it was bustling with guests, it never had a negative vibe, or maybe we were all just too busy to notice it. However, the staff-only areas had a different feeling to them, and when guests would leave, the entire place had a different impact on you. It would feel cold, and you ever get that feeling someone could jump out at you at any point, so you're always kind of on edge? That. I would get goosebumps in areas that weren't cold, shivers in screens as if someone was brushing past me, when I would be standing in them to make sure no one was fooling about. I just keep playing it off as other possibilities, which is what I'm good at doing. One night, I was closing with around 7 other team members. I was team leader at this point, hence it being my responsibility to close up. It was around 12 AM, and I gathered the staff outside of the doors while I was locking the main doors. Just as I was about to do so, we all heard the loud creaking of one of the public bathroom doors open. The creak was long, as if someone was very slowly pushing it open. This creaking sound was well known to us, as you'd constantly hear them open and close with guests using them and kids slamming them. Another team member and I dropped our bags and headed into the ladies' bathroom to check it out, assuming a guest had been left behind unwell or there were kids messing about. However, our protocol was to check each screen and public area before confirming with management the cinema was clear. But then again, mistakes can happen. We headed into the ladies' bathroom and each of the loo doors were closed, apart from the disabled, larger one at the very end. It was wide open. I called out, "Hello?" but nothing. We both walked down and peered into the cubicle, and there was no one. Confused and freaked out, I decided to call the mall security to check the place out for us. Along came 3 security men, and they checked everywhere, but nothing. No one. All our staff-only doors were coded, so no one could run them out if they were messing about. The door that was wide open wasn't loose. In fact, it was stiff as hell. There were no drafts, basically no reason for it to give out this long, chilling creak. We closed up and laughed it off as we all went our separate ways. But that particular chill stuck with me, and each time I'd be in the toilets. You could explain this one as just poor lighting or electrical works. But when it happened to you, it was fucking awful. When we would load up the trolleys to take the rubbish out, you would bring the trolley down to the basement and out of the loading bay. As you were underground at this point, there were no windows. The long basement corridors had them censored lights that would make a clicking sound as they turned on, detecting your motion and movement. One evening, myself and a colleague were taking a trolley down, each and exited the lift. The lights came on, click, 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 as we walked along. We were chatting about something or other, and the next minute, click, 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 the lights went out. It was pitch blackness, to the point I couldn't even see my colleague. Our work radios that were attached to our belts started giving off the worst feedback sound, so we immediately turned them off. My colleague grabbed my arm and we both just stood there. I recall rattling the metal trolley to try and get the lights to detect movement, but nothing. I asked her if she had her mobile on, so we'd to use as a torch, but she didn't, as we weren't supposed to carry them on us, and mine was in the office on charge. We agreed if this was an electrical outage, we should feel the walls to get back to the lift and back upstairs. Now, looking back on the situation, we must have looked like idiots, but we held on to each other and felt the walls back to the lift. Remember, we honestly couldn't see a damn thing. We were in a concrete tunnel with zero light source. We could only see the dim light of the elevator button. We pressed it as soon as we did. Click, 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 all the lights came back on. We left the trolleys there and went up and explained what happened. According to mall security, they had no knowledge of an issue with light in the basement. Yes, maybe it was just a dodgy coincidence, but it was terrifying. Thank God I had my friend with me, as I think I'd been alone. I would have passed out. Another time, I was in the storeroom sorting through a big delivery early in the morning, around 7 a.m. I was the only cinema employee at the time apart from my manager who was in the office. My work radio buzzed and a somewhat young female said, "Can you come to the basement?" It was a voice I didn't recognise, and it was clear as day. The voice said it in a playful way. I stopped in my tracks and headed back to the office, thinking along the way, maybe my manager has his kid in. I walked into him and he looked at me as if to say, "You good?" I asked him if he had anyone in the building with him that may have a radio. He didn't. He had a radio on his desk beside his coffee, and all the other radios were on the charging stations. I explained to him someone asked me on my radio to come to the basement, and in our shock, we just laughed. What else can you do? You go to the basement, of course. We headed to the basement, and no one. We were both totally spooked, and at that point, I honestly questioned my sanity, as I know still to this day what I heard. Other stories from employees I heard but never witnessed. Staff members seeing shadows in the sections behind the screens. Hearing voices next to them when there was nobody there. Unsettling feelings when doing fire checks along the fire escape routes. And access codes on doors buzzing to say a code was input wrong, even though no one was trying to use them. Another messed up story from a girl I worked with, and that I'm still close to. She was on usher duty one day, and a man came out of a screen during a film to tell her there was a man seated behind him and his wife, who kept kicking their chair and whispering. My friend apologised and went in and up the stairs to tell the man to stop. But there was no one there, and no allocated seat purchased for that location. Her and the man assumed he had snuck out, but while checking the CCTV, you can see the annoyed man turn around several times, assuming to tell this man to stop. But on the CCTV, there was no one. Was the aggravated man crazy, or did he really see the ghost of a man sit there? I have no idea. Okay, so the first known time this thing happened was about 2 or 3 years ago. I was coming home from a detention I had after school that was an hour long. It was about 4:15 in the afternoon. As I'm literally stepping foot through the door, my brother and his friend walk into the kitchen. His friend looks at me and says, "How did you get downstairs so fast?" I was confused and just said I just got home. He started acting weird with me, being like, "Stop messing about. You were just upstairs in your bed." I kept telling him I just got home, but he was dead set on the fact I was asleep upstairs. My brother then went back upstairs and I just assumed he had forgotten something. At this point, my brother hadn't said a word to me. When we talked about it later on, he said the reason he went back upstairs is because he saw me too in bed and was checking to see if anyone was in my room. Since then, multiple people have seen me or something that looks like me around the house. It started off as it just being me, but recently, my friend has seen my brother a few times. Once, I actually heard her say hi to him in the kitchen, and I thought she was saying hi to me. So I went into the kitchen and she said, "What the fuck? Where did Riley go? He was stood there at the sink." I was laughing because I was sat in the living room, so my brother would have had to walk past me to get in and out of the kitchen. So again, I thought she was joking at first. Then I remembered I'd never even told her about the past experiences like this. I honestly have no idea what's going on. All I know is something keeps presenting itself as me and my brother to people, and it's getting creepy. Does anyone have any ideas on what this thing might be? There have been so many little experiences that have happened in my house, and nearly everyone has seen something. Not a single one of my friends have stayed over and not experienced something. A couple more examples. Me and one of my best friends were sat downstairs at like 1 or 2 a.m. and she had fallen asleep and I was still watching TV when the door to the kitchen started rattling. A little at first. I blew it off because it does that sometimes due to the slight draft from my front door. But when the handle started shaking aggressively, like it was being messed with, I woke my friend up and told her we were sleeping in my room instead. We fell asleep with my door closed and locked, which I don't normally do, but my friend couldn't sleep unless it was dark. At about 3:30 a.m, my friend wakes me up and tells me my door just opened. I looked and my bedroom door was wide open, but it was locked from the inside and there's no way to open it from the outside. It also couldn't have been her because I have a single bed, so we were pretty cramped to each other. I would have felt her get out of bed to open the door. Another small thing that happens very often. My great-grandma passed away a couple years ago, and because my bedroom is extremely small, my nan, her daughter, gave me my great-grandma's wardrobe, as it's very small and could easily fit. I also have my grandma's engagement ring, which she gave to me when she was alive. When I tell you I hear knocking from this wardrobe every day and every night, I kind of made a joke out of it, and will be like, okay, come on, Laura, stop it. It will stop every time I tell it to. There's also a specific corner in my living room that has a big leather spinning chair in it, and has always given me the strangest feeling of being uneasy. One night, me and my brother and 2 friends were sat watching TV, and no one was sitting in that corner when all of a sudden, one of my friends looked over and screams, then starts covering her eyes. I started covering my ears and freaking out a bit, because I was startled. When we asked her why she screamed, she said she saw a tall, dark figure of a man stood in the corner behind the chair. There's loads more that have happened in my house, and none of it creeps me out apart from whatever that thing is that keeps appearing as me or my sibling. Something about that makes me very uneasy. For some background, I've been a behavioural health nurse for about 12 years, and my first job was at a freestanding mental health facility in the south. This facility is pretty uniquely constructed, as it was originally a plantation owned by a wealthy Irishman who emigrated here sometime in the 1700s. The original plantation house is still there and is now used as the business office, and the hospital itself was constructed to be attached to the house. If you explore the campus, there's a small graveyard with the original owner's tombstone, as well as some other family members of his. Additionally, there's a sign that says something along the lines of, "This is dedicated to the slaves that worked and died on this plantation." Anyway, one of the stories that has been passed down among the employees there for decades is that a young girl in the Irishman's family, one of his daughters or grandchildren, passed away on the plantation at a really young age. That her ghost still lingers around the house and the facility, and that there are certain patient rooms that have an unusual amount of paranormal activity. One day, I was walking past one of these rooms, and in my peripheral vision, I saw a young girl who looked to be about 9 or 10 years old sitting on the bed. She was wearing a colonial-looking dress appropriate for the time period in which she was alive, and looked me directly in the eyes when I turned to look at her. I was incredibly startled, and my mind raced for a few seconds, trying to convince myself that she wasn't there. I walked a few feet past the room, gathered my courage to go back, and she had disappeared from sight. She didn't have any ethereal qualities, nothing otherworldly or strange. She literally just looked like a real person, sitting right there in plain view. During my time there, I never heard of anyone else who saw it as clearly as I did. But every once in a while, one of my co-workers or a patient would experience something strange. like doors opening and slamming shut. I remember one patient in particular that ran out of his room white of a sheet and said that while he was lying in bed, his bathroom door slammed on its own. It was so loud I heard it from the nurse's station myself. This patient was there for addiction and had no history of hallucinations. This happened a few years back, and I was around 9 or 10. I was out of the country in a hotel type of building that gave us the whole top floor. There were 3 rooms, and we only used 2 one night. This was a long time ago, so I don't remember lots of details. But I woke up in the middle of the night, and my siblings were in the room. I tried turning the nightlight on, but it didn't turn on. On one of the walls was a woman. She was like 3D, like, you know, a human, but it was in 2D. I don't know, sort of like when you watch the TV. The woman was blonde, but the weird thing about her was she had like a blue filter over her, and her mouth was open, and she looked really angry. Her halves were also pressed against something. It looked like she was trying to get out, like she was scarring something with her whole hand. She was also moving, and her hands were moving in circles. I ended up running into my parents' room and sleeping there. That really freaked me out, as it was like an actual human. And the only other explanation, other than a ghost, is a projector. But I'm like 89% sure it wasn't. There was another instance. Me and my sister used to share a room and our bed were like 1 meter apart. I saw a shadow pass between our beds. And I now see them all the time, but in the corner of my eye. This was right in front of me. Anyways, I got a bit freaked out, but kept scrolling on my phone. The light was off, but my sister was in the room like 1.5 meters away from me. Suddenly, I see an arm or hand reach out to grab me. My phone? It was the hand up to the elbow-ish. I literally freaked out. You don't scream, but jumped right up, thinking what the fuck I just saw. Like it was a literal arm coming at me, like it looked like a real one. Those are the only proper experiences I had. I once saw a bright white light coming from nowhere, and had someone call my name, and my friends in her house, we both heard it. But other than that, I just kind of see shadows everywhere. I wanted to share, since I'm pretty sure the people I told only like. I have a lot of stories from places I've been throughout my short 22 years. Ever since I was a toddler, I've been experiencing the paranormal. Story 1. There was this apartment I was staying in with my older sister, my mom, and me. I couldn't have been more than like 3 or 4 years old at the time of this strange encounter. I had an imaginary friend named Charlie. My mom didn't think anything of it, till one day my mom's best friend had come over to visit us. I don't know how or what. I must have said to my mom and her best friend, basically to the effect of, "Mommy, Charlie is under the counter." And sure enough, my mom and her best friend checked where I had said, and the name Charlie wrote had been from a long time ago. According to my mom's best friend who told me this story, maybe Charlie wasn't so imaginary after all. Story 2. I was about 9 turning 10 when my mom and sister, stepdad, stepbrother and I were staying in a 2-bedroom apartment. Everything was living there for the first few months till things got weird. One day, I was in my and my sister's room when I heard the radio button click on, but I was home alone at the time. I walked into the living room where the radio was and I turned off the radio again. Just as I was walking back to my room, I heard it click on again, and that would keep happening the duration of the time we lived there. Me and my stepbrother were home alone in my room watching a movie. Then we heard the radio click, and we both looked at each other. We both went into the living room, and there was no one there but us. I walked over and hit the button to turn off. I was sitting on the couch in the living room on my phone. For whatever reason, something told me to look up. I saw the radio button get pressed slowly. Mind you, it's just me in the living room. Story 3. This one in the apartment, we all got woken up to hear Mom screaming. All three of us, me, my sister and my stepbrother, came to our parents' room. My mum woke up with 3 long claw marks down her arm. Story 4. I woke up late and I missed the school bus. My mum called and asked me to take out our new puppy to go to the restroom, and that they were gone and running errands and wouldn't be back for a while. I took the puppy out and we walked back upstairs to our apartment. Just as I was about to touch the handle, I saw the handle turn slowly and the door open, and a rush of cold air hit me and my puppy barked like crazy. I looked at the puppy and he looked at me, and we both stood there for a while before we went inside. Story 5. At that same apartment, my sister and I's bedroom closet door would open on its own, and often found it open when in fact we left it closed. Another time I was home alone. I had picked a movie to watch. I placed the oven on the dresser and went to the restroom, and when I came out, the movie was gone. I checked behind the dresser to see if it had fallen. It was there. It wasn't anywhere. Months go by and we're moving out of that apartment, and I go into my room and I see the movie I had from months ago, in the place I left from months previously. Story 6. 2013, I was 13 going on 14 years old. I had a dream about a house with green carpet. I was walking upstairs, running my finger along the stair railing, into the stop before you reach the loft. And it was another 2-step to reach the loft. I saw another version of me in a white gown, pointing to a room that would later become me and my stepbrother's room. I woke up, and a few months later, my mum and stepdad said they were moving, and that we had a house and we could come to see it. And we drove there, and it was just like the dream of me running my finger along the railing. And I stood in the spot where the other me stood, and I felt drained. And whenever I stood in that spot, I would collapse unexpectedly and abruptly. Story 7. I was watching Netflix in the loft and fell asleep. I woke up to a loud scratching sound. It was 3 claw marks above where I was above my head. I saw an elder Native American woman in a headdress, and I saw the nana that had passed above me at the feet end of the couch. I blinked and they were gone. I was 14 when I had a dream about my mum and sister, and I could see their lifelines. My sister was long, but my mum was short. 3 years later, my mum passed away. Story 9. I was 18 when my sister had my nephew. I was sitting on the couch in the delivery room when I saw my mum in her green and yellow jacket with her SpongeBob beanie standing over my nephew, smiling. She looked up. She looked surprised. I could see her, then she vanished. Story 10. Currently in 2022. I'm staying with my aunt and uncle, and I have my own room. Every so often, my room door gets opened, and there's nothing there. Every time I check, and this keeps happening. It happened again last night on my mum's birthday, January 11th, 2022. Mind you, 2 deaths happened in this house last year, one being my little cousin in February, and our grandma in August. I was expecting some paranormal activity. I have no clue what is following or attached to me. I live in the rural part of the US, in the woods, in a small home. I'm not too deep into the woods. There's a town just half a mile from my home, and the driveway to my house is essentially a straight drive to this town. Why is this important? Because of what I'm going to speak of. This may seem insane, but I've been encountering a diseased deer within my woodland property. This deer has been alive for at least 3 months, and I've seen it 4 or 5 times. My girlfriend, however, claims to see it every day. Furthermore, she claims that this deer is an angel and that it whispers to her. At first, when she said these things, I assumed she was just teasing me, as in the past I had suggested it may be a skinwalker or other mythical creature. However, she's quickly become obsessed with this creature. For example, 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were eating dinner together at home. We were eating some cheap gas station hot dogs, as we were experiencing a major power outage, and most restaurants were closed, and most of our food was spoiled. She suddenly looked out the window at the forest and began saying what amounted to, "I see it. I see the angel. It wants me close to it." She suddenly jumped up and ran outside. At this point, I'm freaking out. One of the people closest to me in my life has just proclaimed a completely insane statement and ran outside into the freezing night. I quickly shoved on my shoes and coat with no socks on and joined her outside. It must have taken me just a minute to get outside behind her, but she was already about 30 feet away from me and into the forest. Keep in mind she's barefoot and wearing long pants and a sweater. I catch up to her and she's just staring into the forest. I asked her if she was okay and she just laughed it off and said, "Oh, I thought I saw the deer outside here again." About a minute later, we were both back inside. This incident has been rolling around in my mind for a while. However, I could have shrugged it off as her just being slightly paranoid about her angel deer she keeps seeing, or once again her teasing me. But just 3 days ago, something happened that made me realise I cannot simply ignore her actions anymore. I wake up for no apparent reason at 2 AM at night. My bed is empty and my curtains are undrawn. I'm tired, so I don't think anything of it, just shift around. The second I got comfy and convinced myself she was just in the bathroom, despite hearing no noise, or taking a midnight walk, which we usually take together, I hear a fucking scream outside. I jolt up and have the worst heart palpitation of my life. It's clearly my girlfriend screaming. I hop up and jolt outside with a speed higher than my heart's BPM. My girlfriend is lying outside, nearly naked, looking up at the sky, pointing with one hand, saying, "He's back, he's back." I'm freaking out now. I literally started crying. I don't know why. I just started crying. The sight of her just laying there screaming at nothing made me so worried for her. I brought her back crying and was debating calling mental health services. I didn't just want to go back to sleep and risk her doing something to herself and getting back up. But she's never had any mental health issues before this. The worst I know of is that she used to have panic attacks and went through an emo phase in college. But after weaning off of caffeine, her panic attacks subsided. And besides, the incident of her running outside that other night, she's never had any issues with mental health. So this is all a shock to me. The next morning, I stayed up all night talking to her. She just wanted to forget about everything. I asked her if she thought she needed therapy. She seemed confused about this. She said she was fine and just stressed about our future in her career. From that day on, she never mentioned the deer or angel. Okay, so I was 14 or 15 at the time, and I was living in a small 3-bedroom house with my father, little sister, 4 or 5 at the time, and my brother, 6 or 7. Myself and my brother both shared a room, and my sister's room was directly outside our door, but to the left, both entering the kitchen. At this time, as I stated before, I was on my bed talking on the phone, when I heard my little sister moving around in her room, going through her drawers, etc. Now this wasn't so strange, as she would always be waking up and pulling things out of her cupboards, clothes, toys, books, etc. It was just a habit she had as a kid. After a few minutes of this, I see her walk past my door wearing a long white nightie into the kitchen. From this point, she's out of sight, but our floorboards are really noisy, so I can tell where she goes. She moves some dishes around and then walks further into the lounge room. At this point, I assumed she went to the toilet, but after her not returning to her bed, I thought she'd gone and sat in the lounge. Another habit she tends to do when she wakes up late at night. So not wanting her to get in trouble, I tell the person on the phone I'll be right back, and proceed to go put her back to bed. But when I go to the living room, she isn't there. So I check the bathroom, not there either. Okay, strange. On my way back to my room, I double check her room, and there she is, in bed, fast asleep, wearing dark purple pyjama suit. So I don't know what I saw that night, but it definitely spooked me. Also, not the only thing I've experienced in this house. So this happened to me as a teen. I believe I was about 16 years old at the time, so about 12 years ago. My sister and I were having two friends stay over for a sleepover one night. It was in the middle of summer and we lived in a tiny town, actually a hamlet, and were surrounded by prairies, lots of farmland. My sister and one friend fell asleep fairly early on in the night, but my other friend and I stayed awake chatting for a while. We had our mattress on the floor, right by the three big windows in my sister's room. We're on the second floor. These windows looked out to the street below, and then across the street to our left was an elementary school. The parking lot for that school was in the middle of our view, and then next to the parking lot, more towards our right, was a farmer's field. So we stay up chatting until about 2:30 or 3 in the morning. Windows are wide open, so there's a lovely warm breeze coming up. And suddenly, my friend stops the conversation and says something like, "Oh, who's that?" I follow her gaze and see she's looking towards the farmer's field. I see two figures coming out of the field. It's obviously dark and they haven't yet come into the streetlight, so I can't make out any features yet. But I assume it's just some of the kids in the neighbourhood. My friend and I continue to watch in silence as these two people make their way into the streetlights and start coming directly towards the house. Now, I really assume it's someone I know, because there's a few teen boys that would often be out late and would come to the house and talk to me and my sister from the window. As they're getting closer, we begin to make out their appearance, and I was truly shocked at how they looked. These two individuals couldn't have been taller than 5 feet. They were identical in all features we could make out, and I mean absolutely identical. They were both Caucasian/white coloured, they both had totally bald heads, and they were both wearing the same long brown robe with a tie in the waist. How I would describe it is that they both sort of looked like they were in monk attire. They were proportional as well, no big heads or big eyes, they just looked like little people. Even though they clearly don't look like anyone I know, as they were coming toward the house, I began to call out to them in a sort of loud whisper, "Hey, hey you!" Then I start yelling out names of the different people in town I knew. I think I was in a bit of disbelief and thought maybe it was a prank. All the while, my friend is totally stunned into silence. These beings make it just up to my parents' cars parked outside, so we have a very clear view of them. Then, they immediately turn on themselves and go back in the direction towards the field. They never once acknowledged my calls. They didn't even look up. But they also appeared to be in discussion with each other, though my friend and I didn't make out any sounds coming from them. We continued to watch them make their way back across the road, and then instead of going back into the field, they start walking down the road. We watch them until we can no longer see them. If you follow that specific road, it just leads to more fields and away from the houses. My friend and I stayed up for another hour talking about what he saw. She's very Christian, so believes it was demonic. I have no idea. It very well could have been demonic, but also it's just so random. The next day, we were told everyone, and they all seemed kind of freaked out, even my parents. I have so many questions. Why did they come towards the house only to then turn back on themselves? I wonder if they intentionally did that, like they knew we were there and wanted to be seen by us. Why were their appearances absolutely identical? Why bald? Short? Why the brown robes? Also, what's up with being out of field at 3 a.m? I've googled and I haven't been able to find much. I did find an obscure YouTube video of a lady saying she was visited by 7 beings that sound exactly what my friend and I saw, but I haven't found anything else. This lady said they're interdimensional beings that know the future. So this happened 10 years ago now, but I still remember it vividly. This was when I was 18 years old and lived with my parents and siblings in a small town that was right near the Rocky Mountains in Canada. It was summertime and about 11:30 at night, and it was a clear night with good visibility. We no longer live in that town, but aren't too far from it now. My friend, who was 17 at the time, also lived with us, and she was with me and saw what I saw. At the time, my family and I were part of what we've now come to know as a cult. This is relevant to the story because it's why we were out late and my parents' door was locked. My friend and I were told that we had to live with the leaders of the cult at this time. It's irrelevant to go into why for this story. The cult leader's house was across the back alleyway and a few houses down from my parents' house. We didn't want to live with them, so we would spend as much time as possible at my parents' house and leave very late at night to go to the cult leader's house. So now, back to the story. Like I said, it was around 11:30 at night. Summertime, clear night. We left my parents' back door to head to the cult leader's house. My mum locks the door behind us, turns off the lights, and I assume goes to bed. My friend and I walk out through our backyard and are in the alleyway. Our backyard has no fence. It just goes straight into the alleyway. We turn left as the cult leader's house is a few houses down and across the alleyway, with a slow incline and bend. I'm hoping this makes visual sense. And behind us, the alleyway stretches a good 5 or so houses back, straight. Right as we step into the alleyway, we hear garbage cans from behind us, and a few houses distance behind us, being knocked around. I can only describe this as imagining someone clumsily knocking into them, and trying to stop them from falling down so they keep knocking them. Because we live right near the mountains, we're used to a ton of wildlife in town. Bears, cougars, moose, etc. So my initial instinct is that it's a bear, and we've startled it while it was getting into someone's garbage. I immediately panic and am wondering if we go back through the yard and bang on my parents' back door that's locked, or if we make a quick break for the cult house, because it's most certainly unlocked. I'm making these calculations very split second because it's all happening so fast. My friend starts saying my name over and over and grabbing my arm. She's looking back towards the garbage cans while I'm trying to plan what to do. Then all of a sudden she screams and I look over my shoulder. Not really any time to think or process at all. And then I see it. It was huge and flying. It swooped over our heads, maybe 4 feet above us, and continued up higher, maybe getting to about 15 feet. Again, no time to think. We were both just screaming and yelling at this point. Here's the kicker. It flew right towards the cult leader's house. It banked between the cult leader's house and the house beside it and flew out of sight. When it banked, we had a really clear view of it, as the streetlights across the alleyway illuminated it well. Now, I'll describe what it looked like and how I cannot fathom that it could be anything other than paranormal. Its wingspan was about 8 to 9 feet long, but maybe larger. It was inky black. I mean just totally the darkest black I can describe. I've never seen anything like it before or since, colour-wise. It had no distinguishable features. No feathers, no head, no eyes, no beak, no legs, nothing. The best way I can describe it is if you imagine a huge stingray, minus the tail and much, much larger, longer wings. My friend describes it like, imagine a shadow of a large flying creature, but a much more solid, darker shadow. It wasn't transparent. Like if you touched it, you would feel it for sure, or at least you think you would. It made no sound other than the smashing of the garbage cans, so it definitely was a physical being, and flew so beautifully, so smoothly. The way it banked between the houses was so effortless, and with it being so large, it was impressive. Anyways, we were totally stunned and shocked and so frightened. We stood there for a short time, watching to see if it would come back, but it never did. Eventually, we gathered ourselves and decided to go to the cult house, even though that was the way the creature went, because the door would be unlocked. When we got inside and we immediately went to one of the leaders, the woman, there were two, a man and a woman, and told her everything as best we could, totally freaked out and shaken up. And when we were finished, she paused and looked at us for a while with a strange look on her face and simply said, and I don't remember this verbatim, "Where there is a great light, there will be great darkness." And then she walked off. My friend and I stayed up for hours by the window looking out, wondering if we would see it. But we never did, and we never saw it again thereafter. I have, since that experience, Attempted to Google on quite a few occasions, and haven't found anything even remotely similar to what we saw. So has anyone potentially seen this being? Or does anyone have any insight? Shortly after my divorce, I sold my house. My best friend and I found an apartment in a 3-unit building. We had the entire second floor. Below us was a 1 and a 2-bedroom unit. None of them were occupied because the landlord had just recently bought the place and was redoing it 1 unit at a time. I worked at a local bar and he would come hang out with me to cruise for women. Everything started off small. We'd come home at 2 in the morning and the smoke alarms would all be going off. The place had the kind that were hardwired, so if one went off, they all went off. The problem was that it was an alarm in the 2-bedroom, empty apartment that was going off. We would have to go down in the basement and throw the breaker off to silence it. Once we turned the breaker back on, then they stayed off until the next night. Sometime later, I'm not sure exactly how many weeks went by, I got up in the morning after having been kept away by my roommate, pacing and talking on the phone. He always did that when he was on the phone, no idea why. I asked who he was talking to so early/late in the day, as it was around 3 AM when this started. He looked at me dead in the eyes and said he thought that it was me on the phone. I had heard his voice and he had heard mine. This happened quite often for a while, but the worst part happened a few months later. I get chills even talking about it. I was sound asleep. My bed was pretty much dead centre of the room. Something yanked on my leg and woke me up. I scanned the room and my eyes stopped at the corner nearest the door. It was eerily dark, almost darker than the rest of the room, and I could tell that something was in that darkness, looking back at me. I was terrified and nothing scares me. I couldn't find my voice to call out my roommate, so I just laid there, staring back at whatever was staring at me. This went on for almost an hour, and then I felt it leave. I no longer felt like I was being watched. Not long after that, the 2 other units became occupied, and everything stopped, even the smoke alarms going off on their own.